Yep, I did it. I finally went ahead and read through Zecheriah Sitchin's work. A work that many of you might know is highly controversial, frequently scoffed at by mainstream historians and often ridiculed. For those of you who don't know, Zecheriah Sitchin was an author who wrote, well, a ton of books on an idea that he believed was the hidden truth behind our own origins. Stemming from Sumerian culture and mythology, Sitchin came to the conclusion from his own research that the Anunnaki, the gods belonging to this ancient pantheon, were in actuality what you might call ancient astronauts, and that these were not deities, no, but actually living, breathing extraterrestrial life forms that not only predated us, but also had a hand in our own creation. As if that wasn't enough to digest, Sitchin added that these aliens, if you will, these Anunnaki, presumed to be the old gods, came from a planet called Nibiru, a planet that had a 3,600 year long elliptical orbit around the sun, and that this planet was due to make its return back into our solar system pretty much any day now, and bring with it devastating cataclysmic events. So without giving any more away, let's dive into the text and see if we can get to the bottom of what Sitchin was trying to warn us about, and determine whether there's anything credible that we can find regarding this rather outlandish idea. Much of what we'll be presenting in today's episode comes from Sitchin's The 12th Planet, a text where he delves into this idea of there being a hidden, undiscovered planet, sometimes dubbed as Planet X, that had invited itself into our solar system by way of its natural, elongated orbit, and caused some planetary chaos. I suppose that's putting it mildly. You see, Sitchin tells us that the solar system looked pretty different some billions of years ago. In fact, according to him, back then there was no Earth, there was no moon, and there were no comets, not even the asteroid belt. In the beginning, there was first the Sun, Mercury, a planet called Tiamat, then Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and finally Neptune. Tiamat is the planet that sticks out for us from Sitchin's description, because as we know, no such planet exists, at least it doesn't exist anymore. Sitchin doesn't go into detail about the properties of this planet, whether it was an ice planet like Neptune or a gas giant like Jupiter, but only tells us that it was the unfortunate planet that happened to be in the path of this returning Nibiru, as it completed its orbit. Here he tells us that Nibiru collided with Tiamat, splitting the planet in two and splattering its debris across the solar system. From this, the asteroid belt was created, the comets were created, and so too were the Earth and the Moon. Attentive viewers will know that the name Tiamat appears coincidentally in the epic Enuma Elish, where we are given the Babylonian creation myth. In this story, Tiamat, sometimes described as a woman, but other times depicted as a monstrous dragon, copulates with her consort Apsu, the primordial god of fresh water. Together they give birth to the gods, the new generation of gods if you will, who go about populating the land with their own noisy offspring. The noise grows so loud that Apsu can no longer stand it, and so, driven to violence, he attempts to destroy them. But his plan is thwarted when the trickster god Enki casts a spell to put Apsu to sleep, where he slays the primordial god in his slumber. Enraged by the murder of her consort, Tiamat swears vengeance upon the gods, her children, but is in turn slain herself by the storm god Marduk, who then proceeds to dismember her. He then scatters her corpse amongst the cosmos, thus establishing the realm of the heavens of the earth. Perhaps it is coincidence, but it would seem that having read Enuma Elish, Sitchin found some symbolism between Tiamat's body being the building blocks of our world and the destruction of Tiamat the planet, which was also necessary for the creation of our world. In both Sitchin's interpretation of ancient Sumerian texts and the Babylonian creation myth Enuma Elish, the origin of the earth is tied to the destruction of a primordial entity, whether this be Tiamat the goddess or Tiamat the planet. In Enuma Elish, Tiamat is a chaotic goddess whose body is split by the god Marduk to form the heavens and the earth. Sitchin echoes this imagery, but reinterprets Tiamat as a planet shattered by a cosmic collision with another celestial body, Nibiru, this so-called 12th planet. In both accounts, Earth is born not as an isolated creation, but as a product of a violent cosmic conflict. Marduk and Nibiru serve parallel roles as agents of order, who transform chaos into structure, and without their intervention, whether divine or astronomical, the Earth, as we know it, would not exist. Sitchin hails Nibiru as the bearer of life into the solar system. It isn't just a catalyst that arbitrarily induces life through its collision, but is actually already teeming with life forms, which we'll get to in a moment. First, Sitchin tells us more about the nature of this Nibiru in terms of its orbit, how it has a major comet-like orbit of 3,600 Earth years, always returning to the place of crossing, somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. This planet generates its own heat and atmosphere. It's a radiating planet, which is home to billions of years of evolution, culminating in the production of intelligent anthropomorphic beings, the ancient astronauts, the gods, the Anunnaki, those who by definition would technically be classified as alien. According to Sitchin, the civilization of these beings on Nibiru doesn't sound that different from our own Earth. Indeed, he tells us that there are cities, courts, palaces, science, technology, space exploration programs. What's more, the beings aren't all that different from us either. They experience the full range of human emotion. Love, hate, sadness, anger. Kind of a mirror of ourselves in a way. Now Sitchin makes a bold leap here, suggesting that the politics on this planet weren't that different from the politics one might expect to find in, say, ancient Rome. Sons were overthrowing fathers, brothers fought brothers over leadership. Corruption, collusion, and everything in between seeped through the authoritative power on this planet. Despite these squabbles, Sitchin tells us that they're a very advanced race, at least scientifically, and that the source of their power was not some sort of fossil fuel or some kind of nuclear power, but actually gold. Somehow this ancient race were able to utilize the properties of gold into powering their entire civilization. And so whilst it's an expensive resource for us, and something we might wear to look pretty, to this race on Nibiru, it was literally the lifeblood of their technology. A shame then that, according to Sitchin, they were running out. Extinction loomed over this super advanced race of technological geniuses, and with that, the political landscape of their world was thrown into turmoil. As mentioned, Sitchin was under the impression that there was a degree of instability within the ruling class of this planet, perhaps more so than we're currently experiencing in our own world. And boy, that's saying something. He tells us that during one cycle, where Nibiru was once again approaching the crossing between Jupiter and Mars, the ruler of this planet was forcefully exiled, and that he fled from his political adversaries in a spaceship. Stay with me here, guys. And then crash landed on the Earth. It is on Earth that this ruler, with a bevy of his companions, discovers that Earth is rich in gold. They also find here that Earth, this brand new planet that wasn't here the last time their planet had come storming through our solar system, miraculously sustained life. Primitive life, yes, but life all the same. In fact, Sitchin describes this less evolved life as being similar to that of the Niburians themselves. Fancy that. Okay, so whilst being stranded here on Earth, the political shitshow on Nibiru seems to just sort itself out. The usurper who banished the former leader is seemingly deposed himself, and a unified peaceful party is born from the ashes of this regime. With that, a rescue mission is organised, and the former ruler and his associates, who'd been hiding on Earth this whole time, are saved. Of course, they have some exciting news to share with their rescuers. The essential minerals they need to save their planet are abundant on Earth. Now here's where Sitchin's ideas get even more elaborate. You see, he paraphrases a biblical verse and, in my opinion, takes it somewhat out of context. He makes reference to those who came crashing down before, seeking to compare the Nibirian ruler who had crashed down on the earth with a specific biblical quote in Genesis 6:2 to be precise. Now, it should be noted that the Genesis account does not mention anywhere about beings from outer space crashing down on Earth. In fact, it makes no reference to any kind of being descending down to Earth, with the exception of the sons of God, where we are told the sons of God saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. At first, it seems as if Sitchin is trying to equate the Nibirians in his research with that of these sons of God, the rebellious angels who we know from apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch descended upon the mortal women out of an unholy infatuation and ended up impregnating them, much to the chagrin of God. These women, we know, ended up giving birth to diabolical monsters, bloodthirsty giants known as Nephilim. However, Sitchin then attempts to conflate these creatures with his Nibirians as well. He tells us Genesis calls them just that, the Nephilim in Hebrew. There's a lot to unpack here, but first let's go back to where Sitchin claims he got this idea. He declares that when he was a young schoolboy, he would read the original Genesis in its Hebrew form, and that before the Genesis God resolved to destroy humanity by way of the flood, the sons of the deities, these presumably being the sons of God, marry the daughters of the earth. According to Sitchin's interpretation though, these were not fallen angels or watchers, but actually the Nephilim themselves, and that it was they who were those who were cast down. By the King James and New International versions of today, we can quite clearly see that there is no mention of Nephilim descending upon the mortal women. In fact, the account notes that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans, and had children by them. If we consult the Book of Enoch, albeit an apocryphal text written much later, this account is corroborated, as we know that the Nephilim were born to the women by way of fallen angels. Sitchin doesn't supply any reasoning as to why he believes it was the Nephilim who descended from the heavens and married the mortal women, other than perhaps this was the original Hebrew meaning by his understanding. Readers of Genesis and the Book of Enoch will already have found some fundamental flaws with Sitchin's argument here, primarily the assumption that these Nephilim were an advanced superior race that were once flying around the cosmos on their giant destroyer of a planet. But allow us to continue down this rabbit hole and see how much thought Sitchin had put into what one might call his very own mythology. The Nephilim, according to Sitchin, are the native inhabitants of Nibiru, and when their previously deposed ruler informs them about the gold on the earth, they return and descend via space capsules that splash into the Arabian Sea just off the Persian Gulf. The chief scientist amongst these Nephilim leads the rest of them wading through the waters until they reach land, somewhere at the edge of the marshes. There they establish the very first Nibirian center, something of a way station or a home base, around 445,000 years ago, where Sitchin tells us the Earth was gripped by an ice age. What's even more interesting than all of this is the name of this home base, Eridu. We know from both historical accounts and mythological stories that Eridu was one of the oldest, if not the oldest city in Sumer. It was believed to have been founded sometime in the 5th millennium BC, and is mentioned multiple times as a site of religious significance, particularly as the home of a series of temples built in dedication to the Mesopotamian deity Enki. Sitchin's work seems to imply that the Eridu station founded here by the Nibirians, or the Nephilim, was the same Eridu that would effectively be remembered as the birthplace of civilization. Could it be then that we did not create our own home, but that our home was merely an alien checkpoint that was later converted into our cradle? Now, Sitchin continues that in the time it takes Nibiru to orbit the Sun, the Earth would have orbited the Sun 3,600 times. so we know based on this that the Nephilim were here for tens of thousands of years. The Ice Age I mentioned earlier was believed to have cleared and began to give way to a warmer climate, allowing the Nephilim to establish additional settlements, including a resource center to manage the gold they had harvested, a medical center, a mission control center, and even a spaceport from which they could launch and land their aircrafts. Indeed, these creatures are certainly a far cry from the violent and murderous Nephilim from the Book of Enoch, who have about as much experience with flying spacecraft as they do with cutlery. Now, according to Sitchin, things would not continue to go this smoothly for the Niburians, because there would soon be a conflict in management. The first leader to have landed down upon the earth was named Enki, indeed the very same name belonging to the Sumerian god of water, and the same Enki, it is theorized, who later becomes man's companion and helper in the Enuma Elish mythology. This Enki, however, was made subordinate to his older brother Enlil, once again the same Enlil found to be the principal deity in Mesopotamian mythology. Arriving on Earth, Enlil quickly assumes responsibility of command and orders Enki, later renamed as Ea, Lord of the Waters, to start extracting gold from the ocean, where it was believed to be in abundance. The plan to farm this gold from the oceans fails though. Sitchin doesn't tell us what exactly went wrong here, but that the decision to dig for gold on land became the more suitable option. Here he tells us that the rank and file of these Nephilim increased to 600, and that some were sent to what would become southeastern Africa to extract gold from the ground. Special sunken boats, those that Sitchin believes were some kind of submarines, transport the ore to southern Mesopotamia, where it was smelted, refined, and taken off the earth in a shuttlecraft toward the mothership, which orbited the earth from above. There it was transported onto Nibiru, the 12th planet, which we are led to believe was close enough to Earth that you could probably have seen it in the sky. After about 300,000 years of work, the Anunnaki, particularly those tasked with mining the gold, get sick of the arduous manual labour and begin a mutiny. Furious to hear that work has ceased, Enlil came down and demanded that the leader of this mutiny be executed. Yet despite the orders, the general consensus, even amongst the higher-ups, was that the work was in fact too harsh, and another means of collecting gold would need to be found. An Anunnaki known as Ninti, also a deity found in ancient Mesopotamian mythology, a mother deity and a mistress of life, was tasked with what Sitchin describes as creating a primitive worker, a being that was just strong enough to carry out the labour on their behalf and just obedient enough to not ask too many questions about it. Indeed, such a creature already existed on the earth that met the physical requirements of such a task, the hominids, or as Sitchin describes them as ape people. All they needed to do, which seemingly was not beyond their capabilities, was to take one of these specimens, genetically splice them, give them consciousness and understanding, and then instruct them to mine the gold. Sitchin tells us that they took the genes of a young Nephilim and fused them into an egg of a captured ape woman. They then implanted the fertilized egg into a female member of the Nephilim. This whole process was pretty much trial and error, seeing to a whole load of imperfect beings being born. Eventually though, the perfect model of man was achieved. Having found the formula for creating the ultimate worker, more fertilized eggs were implanted into the female Nephilim, allowing them to give birth to many Adams and Eves, thus creating the first Homo sapiens. Sitchin tells us that upon their creation, they were immediately put to hard work in the mines of southern Africa. Now at first, Ea kept these new creatures in the land of the mines, where they were exclusively miners, but for some reason, Enlil wanted a whole bunch of them to start working in the fields there, in a place known as the Orchard of Eden. Sitchin doesn't tell us why Enlil wanted mankind to start working the fields when their priority was gold. Was there gold in the fields? Considering the Enlil we know of in Mesopotamian mythology, it's likely he would have wanted mankind to be growing crops and farming, for he did come to be known as an agricultural deity. Enki, though, was less inclined to give his brother these humans, so Enlil took them by force and trapped them within this Orchard of Eden. Ea, on the other hand, who had grown quite attached to man and had begun treating them with certain kindnesses, saw an opportunity to give man a means to fight back against his cruel, domineering brother. Sitchin compares Ea here to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who sneaks into the orchard not to corrupt man, but to still nonetheless turn him against the principal ruler, this god if you will, by further genetically altering them so that they can now reproduce. Sitchin tells us here that the biblical Hebrew, to know, means to copulate for the purpose of having offspring, and that when the biblical Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they learned not only of good and evil, but of how to have sex and how to procreate. Seeing mankind begin to produce on their own, Enlil was disgusted, and he expelled them all from this Orchard of Eden. But by this point it was too late. Mankind had not only learned how to reproduce, but they had also learned how to sustain life through their time in the orchard. They raised cattle, took to farming, even metallurgy. Mankind basically set out on its own course, and did pretty well all by themselves. Until they started killing each other. The Cain effect appears to strike them pretty hard, with a series of murders that get so out of hand that it dooms the first line of mankind, who had up until this point done pretty well for themselves. Here Sitchin tells us that a purer line, a Sethian generation of humanity, comes into being, and because this generation, and the generations that follow, are better behaved, they are allowed back into the good graces of Enlil, where they began to build the very first temples to worship these Anunnaki, not as a superior alien race from another planet, but as gods. It's here that Sitchin begins to flesh out his ideas about Genesis 6:2, incorporating elements from the Enochian account to illustrate his ideas. He tells us that the sons of the gods, presumably being another generation of Anunnaki/Nephilim, begin to cohabit with the daughters of men. When Enlil found out about this, he was furious, believing that the sexual act with humans was a taboo, and the production of their offspring was a defilement of the gods' racial purity. In order to vanquish such filth, he ushers in a new ice age that saw to the climate changing, the lands becoming drier, and the crops eventually failing. Ea, though, once again feels bad for humanity, and clandestinely helps mankind by giving them fish from the sea. But the hunger spread all the same, and soon there was cannibalism. Mankind was brought to the brink of their decimation, but still, they clung to life. Now, the scientists amongst these Anunnaki begin to report that the ice sheet over the Antarctic continent was beginning to shift, gliding on its own slush. They sensed imminent danger. The mothership hovering above Earth also confirmed this. Nibiru, their home planet, was making its way back towards the Earth. The gravitational pull alone would give the ice sheet the fatal nudges it needed, and as the ice sheet would slip into the ocean, a vast tidal wave would engulf the Earth. The Anunnaki decided that it wasn't worth telling the humans of the imminent cataclysm. It would only instill panic and disorder. Besides, they had the gold now, so their interest in Earth and humanity had dwindled. But one of the Anunnaki, the ever-compassionate Enki, decided to tell one faithful Earthling, the one who Sitchin tells us was Noah. Enki teaches this man how to build a vessel that could float upon the incoming deluge. He is given instructions to enter the vessel and to seal it from within, when the sky will be lit with rising spacecraft. He is told to navigate the vessel, this ark if you will, to Ararat. When the gods, the Anunnaki, are safely aboard the mothership orbiting the Earth, they cannot resist such morbid curiosity and proceed to spectate the decimation caused by the huge tidal wave and the ensuing rains that came with it. Many of these Anunnaki cry and repent, for they now felt guilt for having allowed this calamity to fall upon mankind. However, as the waters eventually abate and the peaks of Ararat emerge, the Anunnaki descend in their craft once more and land on the available spaces. To their shock, they find this Noah, who in the Sumerian Enuma Elish you might refer to as Utnapishtim, is alive and well, having been saved by Ea, as well as the surviving women, children and animals. This lone man builds a fire and roasts some sheep, which Sitchin tells us is the favourite food of the gods. Enlil is furious that humans still exist, and that evidently one of the other gods, probably Ea, has defied him. However, the other gods convince Enlil that this is probably for the best, likely because it soothed their own compunction about having let all the others die, and because they couldn't bear to have seen the last of humanity slain when they'd obviously gone through so much to have survived. What's more, everything the Anunnaki had built, all those spaceports, control centers and settlements, were now all destroyed. They'd need mankind to rebuild those again. Indeed, Sitchin implies here that the Anunnaki had grown attached to the Earth, and may have wanted to visit again. Why else would they want to rebuild? Enlil, albeit reluctantly, agrees, and blesses Noah, or Utnapishtim, and his wife, taking them up to the mothership and on towards Nibiru, the home of the gods. Here Sitchin tells us that Noah and his children are taught the ways of agriculture, husbandry, and given tools such as the plough and seeds to grow things. Post-Diluvian civilization begins here, sometime around 11,000 BC. The valleys of this post-flood Earth are filled with mud, and much of the Earth is still ruined. So in this time, mankind and the gods lived together in the mountain lands for several thousand years. By this point, Nibiru is making its way back round again, and though we know this will have dramatic repercussions on the Earth, Sitchin doesn't actually tell us about them. Are we to believe that mankind was safe in these mountains from the possibility of another flood? Or did the Anunnaki use their advanced technology to somehow defend against any natural disasters? All Sitchin tells us is that the Anunnaki decide to start civilizing man, teaching him to domesticate animals, build houses, and how to use clay for pottery and construction. Then in another several thousand years, the Anunnaki deem it safe to return to southern Mesopotamia, where the grounds are now fertile again. And there they have mankind rebuild the settlements exactly the way they were, including the first city of Eridu. Sitchin tells us that the civilization of Sumer seemingly blooms overnight. During this time, mankind is taught astronomy, mathematics, chemistry, and advanced architecture. Ziggurats are built to house divine birds and whirlwinds. Temples are erected in honor of the Anunnaki, now firmly believed by mankind to be gods. More cities are constructed beyond Eridu. Believing they have imparted sufficient knowledge for mankind to sustain themselves with, the Anunnaki retreat to the skies in their ships and watch humanity from a distance. But one of these Anunnaki, whom Sitchin notes was a god of science, maintained a closer acquaintance with some of his Sumerian followers than he ought to. Unbeknownst to the other gods, this deity told his followers of an unfinished spaceport that had miraculously survived the flood in a place known as Babylon, the gateway of the gods. By finishing this construction, the Sumerians are led to believe that they can reach the realm of the gods. All they had to do was repair the launch tower, that which Sitchin claims was the Tower of Babel. But when the other Anunnaki find out about this, they sought to sabotage mankind, for they did not want them entering their domain. To forestall the future efforts in rebuilding this spaceport, they did as the biblical god is seen to do to the workers of the Tower of Babel, and confused their language so that man suddenly spoke in many different tongues. This has the effect of dispersing mankind and its inhabitants, spreading them across the earth, and ultimately preventing them from ever rebuilding this gateway of the gods. This is the basics of Sitchin's theory, which I'm sure we can agree is interesting, but does beg a lot of questions. The main question that might be asked is, what happened to the Anunnaki? Sitchin implies here that they retreated to the skies and started to observe humanity, leading us to theorize, what if that's exactly what happened, and that they're still up there now, observing us? Maybe in the form of what we now call UFOs or UAPs. Are these the craft that are spoken of so vividly in his account? Sitchin certainly seems to think so, suggesting that these could be advanced scouts of their future revisitation to the Earth. Another question that must be asked is, if Nibiru has this unfortunate orbit of rampaging through our solar system, then is it coming back around again in our time? Sitchin certainly seems to think so. He combines his answer with that of the biblical narrative, implying that the return of Nibiru into our atmosphere is akin to the day of the Lord, when the kingship of heaven would return to Earth. He adds, the 12th planet, by all calculations, is on its way back to our vicinity. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.